The German paratrooper hit the ground already dead, his parachute tangled in an olive tree, bullet holes stitched across his chest. A Cretan farmer stood beneath him holding a pitchfork, waiting to see if any more would fall within reach. May 20th, 1941. The island of Crete. For the first time in military history, an entire invasion force is arriving from the sky. No ships, no beaches, just thousands of men dropping from transport aircraft into fields, orchards, and villages where armed civilians are waiting alongside British and Commonwealth soldiers who had been retreating for months. The Germans expected to take the island in 2 days. The battle would last 11. It would cost Germany so many paratroopers that Hitler would never again attempt a major airborne operation. And it would end with 30,000 Allied soldiers evacuated under fire, leaving behind an island that would suffer some of the worst reprisals of the entire war. This is the story of the first airborne invasion in history. The civilians who fought it with farming tools, and the soldiers who discovered that winning in the air does not guarantee victory on the ground. Spring, 1941. German forces were dominating Europe with a speed that seemed unstoppable. Poland fell in 4 weeks, Denmark in 6 hours, Norway in 2 months. The Netherlands lasted 5 days, Belgium 18. France, which had held for 4 years in the previous war, collapsed in 6 weeks. Yugoslavia was crushed in 11 days. Greece, despite British support, surrendered in 3 weeks. The pattern was consistent. German forces attacked with overwhelming air superiority, used paratroopers to seize key positions behind enemy lines, then pushed armored columns through the chaos. Defenders retreated. Governments evacuated. Capitulation followed quickly. By late April 1941, British and Commonwealth forces in Greece were being driven south toward the ports. Evacuation was the only option. Ships rescued 50,000 troops and transported them to Crete, the large Greek island 100 miles south in the Mediterranean. The men arrived exhausted, demoralized, and missing most of their heavy equipment. Crete was strategically valuable to both sides. For Germany, the island could serve as an air base threatening British control of the eastern Mediterranean and the Suez Canal. For Britain, Crete protected supply routes to Egypt and North Africa. Losing it would expose the entire Middle Eastern theater. The problem was that Crete was nearly impossible to defend properly. The island stretched 160 miles east to west, but was only 35 miles wide at its broadest point. The northern coast had 3 airfields and 2 major ports. The interior was mountainous, rugged, and connected by poor roads. Moving troops and supplies across the island was difficult. Coordinating defense across that distance was nearly impossible. The garrison numbered approximately 42,000 men. About 10,000 were Greek soldiers, poorly equipped and demoralized after their country's defeat. The rest were British, Australian, and New Zealand troops evacuated from Greece. Many units had lost their artillery, anti-aircraft guns, and transport vehicles during the evacuation. Some soldiers arrived without rifles. The commander was Major General Bernard Freyberg, a New Zealand officer who had won the Victoria Cross in the First World War. He was 52 years old, highly regarded, and completely aware that his force was inadequate for the task. He had too few men spread across too much ground with insufficient equipment and almost no air cover. The Royal Air Force had withdrawn its few remaining aircraft from Crete, judging them too vulnerable to German air attack. Freyberg told his superiors in Cairo that Crete could not be held without significant reinforcement, particularly anti-aircraft guns and fighter aircraft. Neither were available. He was ordered to defend the island with what he had. Intelligence reports indicated Germany was preparing an airborne invasion. This would be unprecedented. Germany had used paratroopers before in small numbers to seize bridges and fortifications. But an entire invasion from the air, with no supporting ground forces, had never been attempted. Most military analysts considered it impossible. Freyberg did not think it was impossible. He thought it was extremely dangerous for both sides. Paratroopers were vulnerable while descending and immediately after landing. If defenders could reach drop zones quickly, they could massacre airborne troops before they organized. But if the paratroopers could seize an airfield intact, transport aircraft could land reinforcements and heavy equipment, turning initial advantage into overwhelming force. The key was the airfields. 3 of them. Maleme in the west, Retimo and Heraklion further east. If all 3 could be held, the invasion would fail. If Germany captured even one, they could pour in troops and supplies until defenders were overwhelmed. Freyberg positioned his forces accordingly. New Zealand troops defended Maleme. Australian units held Retimo. British forces garrisoned Heraklion. Greek soldiers and Cretan irregulars filled gaps between the main positions. Every man was told that if paratroopers landed, the response must be immediate and violent. Do not let them organize. Attack while they were scattered and vulnerable. The Germans began their attack at dawn on May 20th with a massive air bombardment. Every aircraft available to the Luftwaffe participated. Stukas dive-bombed defensive positions. Fighters strafed trenches. Medium bombers carpet-bombed suspected strong points. The bombardment lasted 2 hours and was the most intense many defenders had ever experienced. Then the air filled with transport aircraft. Junkers Ju-52S, dozens of them, flying low and slow over the island. Their doors opened and paratroopers jumped, hundreds at a time. The sky bloomed with parachutes, white and colored, drifting down toward olive groves and fields. Allied troops opened fire from every position. Machine guns swept the air. Rifles cracked continuously. Paratroopers were hit while still in the air, their bodies going limp, parachutes carrying corpses down into trees and rocks. Others landed in the middle of defensive positions and were killed before they could unbuckle their harnesses. The German plan called for paratroopers to land, seize weapons containers that dropped separately, organize into units, then assault the airfields. In practice, the drops were chaotic. Strong winds scattered men across miles. Weapons containers landed far from the troops who needed them. Some paratroopers came down directly on top of Allied positions and died within seconds. At Maleme Airfield, German forces landed west of the runway in dried riverbeds and olive groves. New Zealand defenders counterattacked immediately. Fighting became close and desperate. Paratroopers without weapons used entrenching tools and knives. New Zealanders bayoneted men still tangled in parachute harnesses. Cretan civilians joined the battle without orders or organization. Farmers grabbed whatever was available, ancient hunting rifles, axes, kitchen knives, and attacked paratroopers in the fields. Women threw stones. Children pointed out where Germans were hiding. The civilian participation was spontaneous and widespread, and it terrified the German troops who had expected to face only soldiers. One German officer wrote in his diary that evening that the invasion was failing. Casualties were catastrophic. Units were scattered and leaderless. Ammunition was running low. If the Allies counterattacked in force, the entire operation would collapse. But the Allies did not counterattack in force. Communication across the island was nearly impossible. Radios had been lost during the evacuation from Greece. Telephone lines were cut by bombing. Commanders could not coordinate actions or even confirm what was happening at other sectors. Each position fought in isolation, unaware of the overall situation. At Maleme, the critical position was Hill 107, which overlooked the airfield. New Zealand troops held the hill in fortified positions. As long as Hill 107 remained in Allied hands, German aircraft could not land safely. The airfield would be unusable. Throughout May the 20th, German paratroopers attacked the hill repeatedly. Each assault was repulsed with heavy casualties. By evening, the New Zealand battalion defending the hill was battered but intact. They had held. The airfield remained denied to the Germans. Then communication failures created disaster. The battalion commander on Hill 107 could not contact his brigade headquarters. He did not know the overall situation. His casualties were severe, ammunition was low. He believed German forces were massing for another assault that would overwhelm his weakened position. Without orders or information, he made the decision to withdraw from the hill during the night and consolidate with other units. It was a reasonable decision based on the information he had. It was also catastrophic. By dawn on May 21st, Hill 107 was abandoned. German troops occupied it unopposed. Maleme airfield was now under their control. Transport aircraft began landing immediately. They came in under fire. Many were hit and crashed, but enough got through. Each aircraft carried troops and supplies. Within hours, hundreds of German mountain infantry were arriving. By afternoon, thousands. Artillery pieces were unloaded. Ammunition was distributed. What had been a desperate, scattered invasion force became an organized army. Freiburg finally understood the situation by midday on May 21st. Maleme was lost. German reinforcements were pouring in. The battle had shifted decisively. He ordered counterattacks to retake the airfield, but his forces were scattered, exhausted, and lacking coordination. The attacks were piecemeal and uncoordinated. German defenders, now reinforced and supplied, repulsed them. At Retimo and Heraklion, the situation was different. Australian and British defenders had contained the German drops. Paratroopers in those sectors were surrounded, running low on ammunition and being systematically eliminated. If the battle had been decided in those sectors, the Allies would have won decisively. But wars are not won by defensive success in secondary positions. Maleme was the decisive point. With the airfield operational, Germany could reinforce faster than the Allies could respond. The mathematics of the battle shifted against the defenders. Over the following days, German forces pushed east from Maleme. They advanced along the coastal road toward Kania, the administrative capital. Fighting was bitter. Allied troops fought delaying actions from prepared positions, then withdrew when in danger of being surrounded. The pattern repeated continuously. Hold, fight, withdraw. Hold, fight, withdraw. Cretan civilians continued fighting alongside the soldiers. They ambushed German patrols. They hit Allied soldiers. They destroyed German supply dumps. Their participation was brave and ultimately disastrous. German command decided that civilian resistance violated the laws of war. Reprisals would be severe. By May 26th, Freiburg knew Crete could not be held. German air superiority was absolute. The Luftwaffe controlled the sky. Every movement in daylight drew immediate air attack. Reinforcement or resupply by sea was impossible. The Royal Navy had tried repeatedly to intercept German convoys bringing heavy equipment, but German air power sank or damaged so many British ships that the Navy withdrew to avoid losing its entire Mediterranean fleet. Churchill and commanders in Cairo authorized evacuation. Once again, British and Commonwealth forces would retreat under fire. The ports on the northern coast were too exposed to German air attack for safe evacuation. The only option was Fakia, a small fishing village on the southern coast, accessible only by mountain roads. 30,000 men had to cross the central mountains to reach Fakia, then be evacuated by ships that could only operate at night. The entire operation would take place under constant German pressure as enemy forces pursued from the north. The withdrawal began on May 27th. Rear guard units fought to delay German advance while the main force retreated south over mountain tracks, barely wide enough for single file. Wounded were carried on improvised stretchers. Equipment that could not be carried was destroyed. The retreat was orderly, but desperate. At Retimo and Heraklion, Australian and British forces still held their positions and were still winning their battles. They had contained the German drops. They had destroyed paratrooper units. They had defended their airfield successfully, but orders came to evacuate because Maleme had been lost. The strategic situation demanded withdrawal from positions they had successfully defended. The Australians at Retimo could not be evacuated. German forces cut them off before they could withdraw. After resisting for days and inflicting severe casualties on German paratroopers, they were forced to surrender. Nearly 800 Australian soldiers went into captivity, having won every engagement they fought. At Heraklion, British forces destroyed the airfield facilities and withdrew south. Royal Navy destroyers evacuated them directly from Heraklion Harbor in a night operation that cost several ships to German air attack, but rescued the garrison. At Sfakia, the evacuation became a nightmare of organization under pressure. 30,000 men waiting on exposed beaches. Ships could only arrive after dark and had to leave before dawn to avoid air attack. Each night, a few thousand were evacuated. The rest remained, waiting their turn, knowing German forces were approaching. Priority was given to units that had not broken under pressure, a brutal but necessary decision. Men who had maintained discipline and organization were evacuated first. Those who had scattered or lost cohesion waited longer. Some would not be evacuated at all. The Royal Navy performed heroically. Destroyers and cruisers made repeated trips despite continuous German air attacks. Ships were bombed, strafed, and sunk. Casualties among naval personnel were severe, but the ships kept coming night after night until the last possible moment. By June 1st, approximately 18,000 men had been evacuated from Sfakia. 12,000 remained, including wounded who could not be moved and rearguard units that had held defensive positions until the last ships departed. These men were ordered to surrender. They destroyed their weapons and became prisoners. The Battle of Crete was over. Germany had won. The swastika flew over the island, but the victory was costly beyond anything German commanders had anticipated. German casualties were staggering. Over 6,000 paratroopers and mountain infantry were killed. Thousands more were wounded. Entire battalions of elite airborne troops were effectively destroyed. Over 200 transport aircraft were lost, many with full loads of troops still aboard when they crashed. For the first time in the war, German forces had suffered casualty rates comparable to the Allies. The myth of invincibility was cracked. More significantly, Hitler was so shocked by the losses that he forbade any future large-scale airborne operations. Germany never again attempted a major paratrooper assault. The entire airborne arm, trained at great expense, would spend the rest of the war fighting as ground infantry. Allied losses were also severe but different in character. Approximately 1,700 British and Commonwealth soldiers were killed. 12,000 were captured, but 18,000 were successfully evacuated and would fight again. The Royal Navy lost 3 cruisers and 6 destroyers sunk, with 17 other ships damaged. Nearly 2,000 sailors died. The human cost to Crete itself was catastrophic. German forces enacted brutal reprisals against civilian population for their participation in the fighting. Villages were burned. Civilians were executed en masse. Entire communities were destroyed. The reprisals continued throughout the German occupation and intensified after partisan resistance emerged. Thousands of Cretan civilians were killed during the occupation. The island suffered famine, forced labor, and systematic destruction of infrastructure. The scars from those years marked Crete for generations. The participation in the battle, however brief and spontaneous, had consequences that lasted far beyond the 11 days of fighting. The strategic impact of Crete's fall was significant. Germany now controlled a base threatening British supply lines to Egypt. Luftwaffe aircraft operating from Crete could attack convoys in the eastern Mediterranean. The Royal Navy's freedom of movement was restricted. But the strategic cost to Germany was equally significant. The losses in trained paratroopers could not be easily replaced. Elite units that took years to train were gone. Hitler's confidence in airborne operations was permanently damaged. When opportunities arose later in the war where paratroopers might have made decisive differences, they were not available or not trusted with major operations. Tactically, the battle revealed important lessons that both sides absorbed. Airborne operations required meticulous planning and overwhelming support. Paratroopers were extremely vulnerable immediately after landing. Defenders who reacted aggressively could slaughter airborne forces before they organized. Communication and coordination were essential, and their absence could turn local victories into strategic defeat. The loss of Maleme Airfield demonstrated how a single tactical error could cascade into strategic disaster. The New Zealand commander's decision to withdraw from Hill 107, reasonable in isolation, changed the entire battle's outcome. One position, held or abandoned, determined whether Germany could reinforce or not. For the Allies, Crete reinforced painful lessons learned repeatedly during 1940 and 1941. Air superiority was decisive. Without control of the air, ground forces could not operate effectively in daylight. Supply lines were vulnerable. Reinforcement was nearly impossible. Modern war required air power, and Britain in 1941 did not have enough aircraft in the right places. The evacuation also demonstrated that the Royal Navy would accept severe losses to rescue soldiers. The Navy lost ships and men it could not afford to lose, but it brought 18,000 soldiers back to Egypt. Those men would fight again at El Alamein, in Italy, in northwest Europe. The decision to risk the Mediterranean fleet to save them was strategically sound despite the immediate cost. For the soldiers evacuated from Crete, the experience was deeply demoralizing. Many of them had been evacuated from France the previous year. Then Greece, now Crete. 3 evacuations in 12 months. Each retreat was executed successfully, but constant withdrawal damages morale in ways that cannot be easily measured. One Australian soldier wrote that he was becoming very good at evacuating under fire, but would prefer to advance for a change. The gallows humor reflected a deeper frustration. Well-trained soldiers were being used defensively, reacting to German initiatives, withdrawing from positions they had successfully defended because strategic situations elsewhere demanded it. Yet these same soldiers would prove decisive 18 months later when the tide turned. The Australians evacuated from Crete fought at El Alamein. The New Zealanders fought in Italy. The British units fought in northwest Europe. They had learned hard lessons through repeated defeats. They had learned to fight outnumbered and under air attack. They had learned to maintain discipline during chaotic withdrawals. When conditions finally favored the Allies, when air power was available and supply lines were secure, these veterans proved formidable. The Battle of Crete was a defeat, but it was not a waste. The soldiers who survived it brought experience that could not be taught in training. The German paratroopers told a different story. Those who survived Crete were never again used in their intended role. They had trained for years to jump from aircraft and seize objectives behind enemy lines. After Crete, they fought as ground infantry in conventional battles. Their specialized training became irrelevant. The weapon Germany had forged at such great cost was put away and never properly used again. Historians continue debating whether Germany's victory at Crete was worth the cost. The island provided air bases, but those bases were primarily used defensively to threaten Allied shipping. Germany never leveraged Crete into further offensive operations in the eastern Mediterranean. The strategic value gained did not obviously justify the losses suffered. Some German officers argued after the war that the resources invested in Crete would have been better used in Russia, where Germany invaded just 3 weeks after Crete fell. The elite troops who died in Crete were unavailable for Barbarossa. The transport aircraft lost at Crete were not available for supply operations on the Eastern Front. The victory, they suggested, weakened Germany for its most important campaign. For Britain, the loss of Crete was another in a long series of defeats, but it was different from France or Greece. At Crete, Allied forces had fought effectively. They had killed Germans in large numbers. They had demonstrated that German forces could be stopped and defeated in local engagements. The overall battle was lost, but individual actions were won. That distinction mattered psychologically. Churchill described Crete as a victory dearly bought by the enemy. The phrasing was politically necessary, reframing defeat in terms that maintained morale, but it contained truth. Germany won Crete, but at a cost that changed their strategic calculus for the rest of the war. Today, Crete remembers the battle with monuments, museums, and annual commemorations. The island's participation in the fighting remains a source of pride, despite the terrible reprisals that followed. Elderly Cretans still tell stories passed down from grandparents about the 11 days when farmers fought paratroopers with pitchforks and hunting rifles. Commonwealth war cemeteries mark where British, Australian, and New Zealand soldiers are buried. The graves are maintained by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission with the same care given to cemeteries in France and Belgium. Each stone marks a man who fought in a battle that was lost but mattered nonetheless. German military cemeteries on Crete hold thousands of paratroopers who died in those 11 days. The stones are simple and uniform, offering no explanation for why so many elite soldiers died taking an island that provided limited strategic value. The Battle of Crete lasted from May 20th to June 1st, 1941. 11 days that cost Germany its airborne capability, Britain another evacuation, and Crete years of brutal occupation. The first airborne invasion in history succeeded tactically but failed strategically. It won ground but lost the weapon that took it. The paratroopers who dropped from the sky that morning expected to overwhelm defenders quickly through surprise and superior training. Instead, they encountered soldiers who had been retreating for months and were desperate for any victory, even small ones. They encountered civilians who fought with farming tools because parachutists landing in their fields seemed like targets that could actually be hit. By the time the battle ended, Germany had learned that airborne invasion without overwhelming support was suicidal. The Allies learned that aggressive defense could defeat supposedly unstoppable tactics. And Crete learned that participation in modern war brought consequences that lasted far beyond the fighting. The man hanging dead in the olive tree on that first morning was one of thousands who would fall the same way. The farmer with the pitchfork standing beneath him represented civilian courage that was admirable and tragic. Both were part of a battle that changed nothing immediately, but altered everything over time. That is Crete. 11 days when paratroopers fell from the sky and discovered that landing was easier than winning. When defenders fought well but lost anyway because one hill was abandoned. When civilians paid prices soldiers could walk away from, and when both sides learned lessons that shaped the rest of the war. Even though the battle itself ended in retreat and occupation, and graves that stretch in quiet rows beneath the Mediterranean sun.